Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD television. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been following for you today. If you've noticed more empty shelves with higher price tags, you're not alone. Inflation just hit a 39-year high, and shortages are being reported nationwide. The White House is planning to send 10 million free COVID tests to schools in an effort to maintain in-person learning. But how many of these tests are being imported from China? With Washington D.C.'s citywide vaccine mandate set to go into effect this weekend, some members of Congress are pushing back. If prices seem high to you, you're right. Inflation just hit a 39-year high. The Labor Department today reports that inflation jumped 7% for the year ending in December, the steepest climb since 1982. The Consumer Price Index increased 0.5% in December alone, higher than economists had predicted. Prices for food, apparel, cars, and medical care all rose in December. The Federal Reserve plans multiple interest rate hikes this year to fight off inflation. This new inflation report adds to a list of challenges the Biden administration is facing. A new poll finds Americans are shifting their focus from the handling of the pandemic to the economy. If you've noticed more empty shelves at grocery stores lately, you're not alone. Shortages are being reported nationwide. Shortages at U.S. grocery stores have grown worse in recent weeks. Typically 5 to 10% of items are out of stock at any given time, but right now it's higher than 15%.
I can tell you everyone we meet with, from pet food to detergent to cereal, they're all confronting the same challenges.
Those challenges include surging OMICRON cases, taking workers off of their shifts, weather emergencies impacting deliveries, and inflation.
We know that high inflation exacts a toll. We will use our tools to support the economy and a strong labor market and to prevent higher inflation from becoming entrenched.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said the elevated inflation was caused by supply and demand imbalances and bottlenecks during the pandemic. House Budget Committee Republican leader Jason Smith issued a statement saying the Congressional Budget Office warned that inflation was outpacing wage growth and Americans were losing purchasing power. Washington, D.C. will be subject to Mayor Muriel Bowser's vaccine mandate starting on Saturday. Congressman James Comer has been pushing back against these vaccine mandates, and we have him here to discuss with us. Congressman James Comer, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Now, Congressman, Washington, D.C., there's been a vaccine mandate that's set to go into effect this Saturday. You and your colleague, Congressman Ralph Norman, penned a letter to the mayor asking her to remove this mandate. Why'd you write this letter to her?
Well, this is going in the wrong direction. Once again, Washington, D.C.'s leadership is making terrible decisions. You know, the House Oversight Committee has jurisdiction over the city of Washington, D.C. It's always been a hot mess. They're constantly asking for financial assistance. When you do these draconian measures to require people to present a passport, you're going to have a negative impact on the city. School groups are going to cancel because there are a lot of children in America that just haven't been vaccinated. And it's a freedom thing. You know, this is the nation's capital. To have a vaccine passport, which I think is clearly unconstitutional, it's anti-freedom, sets a bad example for other cities, sets a bad example for America. It's going to have a negative impact on the economic climate in the city. People have told me they're not going to Washington, D.C. They were going to come up here with a trade association or a convention or something like that. They're frustrated. They either haven't been vaccinated or they don't think it's anybody's business whether or not they've been vaccinated. So this is just bad policy. And once again, we're calling on the mayor to reverse another executive decision that she's made.
Now, Congressman, we're also seeing scientific data showing that vaccines are not as effective or effective at all against Omicron. In some instances, they may cause more harm than good. With a situation like this unfolding, what is the recourse going to be if, in fact, it does prove that the vaccine is not, working against Omicron?
Well, I'm certainly not an anti-vaxxer, but having said that, you're exactly right. The data clearly shows that this vaccine, that the booster shot is not nearly as effective as what we were promised in the beginning, especially against this new variant. So once again, you have liberal politicians that are basing major decisions on something that is clearly not backed by the science. So once again, this is a bad decision by Mayor Browser. It's in a series of bad decisions. I'll give her credit. She's consistent. She consistently makes bad decisions. And it would be different, I guess, if this weren't the nation's capital and if this weren't a city that's constantly coming to Congress wanting more financial assistance.
Now, Congressman Comer, you've been quite busy this week. You also had another joint press release over another issue, Dr. Fauci's emails and a potential lab leak cover-up. Tell us about this.
Well, this is very disappointing, but not surprising. We've requested documents, we've requested correspondence between Dr. Fauci and leading scientists from the very beginning of the pandemic. They sent us a bunch of emails that were redacted. We've been pushing with a new rule that we have in our arsenal, in the minorities arsenal, called the 7-member rule, to get those unredacted emails. We were finally allowed a staff person to go in HHS and transcribe those emails. What we found was very shocking. In early February of 2020, I guess the scientists that advised Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins on pandemic, leading scientists around the world, they sent emails to Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins saying that they believed that this virus, COVID-19, came from a lab leak in Wuhan and that it appeared from the genetic sequence that this was man-made. Well, Dr. Fauci then had a conference call with these scientists, and there were a dozen scientists that raised concerns that this was in fact from a lab leak and this was probably man-made. He had a conference call with them. 3 days later, Dr. Fauci authored a paper, and every one of these scientists who just 3 days earlier had signaled their concern that this was from a lab leak in Wuhan and that this was man-made, all signed on to Dr. Fauci's letter saying that it's just a conspiracy theory to think that this was man-made and that this could have been leaked from a lab. This was definitely animal to human. And what we want to know is what happened over those 3 days.
Representative James Comer, thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
West Virginia Governor Jim Justice tested positive for the CCP virus, and he will not be able to deliver a State of the State address today. He said he feels extremely unwell at this point while he's isolating at home. Governor Justice is fully vaccinated and boosted. The National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund says that last year, 301 active duty police officers died from the CCP virus. COVID was identified as the leading cause of death among police for the second year in a row. To keep schools open as CCP virus cases surge, the Biden administration announced today to provide an additional 10 million free virus tests per month to schools nationwide. The White House said the administration will send 5 million free rapid tests to K-12 schools each month. What's more, they'll also make 5 million lab-based PCR tests available to schools on a monthly basis, so schools can perform testing in classrooms. It will be funded by the American Rescue Plan. This announcement comes as the country hit a record high of daily new virus cases on Monday. Some school districts have temporarily moved to virtual learning amid the spike. And in an effort to keep schools safely open, the White House COVID response team today announced plans to send millions of free test kits to schools. But some lawmakers are raising concerns about where these tests are coming from. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more on that.
The White House COVID response team today gave an update on the virus. There's been between a 33 and 47% increase in cases, hospitalizations, and deaths over the past week. But the CDC director noted that most of these deaths are a lag from the Delta variant, since data shows that the Omicron variant is less severe. As of right now, around 98% of cases across the country are from the Omicron variant.
Is that virtually everybody is going to wind up getting exposed and likely get infected.
Death rates are down from Omicron of about 91%.
The team also announced efforts to advance new therapies and acknowledge that schools should stay open.
The president is clear. The nation's schools can and should be open. And we have given state and local leaders the resources to ensure they can be open.
To help keep classes running smoothly, the administration is sending 10 million test kits to schools per month, 5 million lab tests, and 5 million rapid tests. The administration is still working to distribute 500 million tests to Americans' homes. Some of these rapid tests are made in China, including at least 2 widely available antigen tests. This is sparking national security concerns for some. Senator Rick Scott wrote in a letter to the Biden administration asking that 0 tax dollars go to the Chinese Communist regime for these tests because, quote, every dollar spent on COVID-19 tests manufactured in Communist China goes directly to supporting General Secretary Xi and his genocidal regime. Scott also wants to ensure that our fight against COVID-19 both supports American jobs and holds Communist China accountable for the virus it's unleashed on the American people.
And we just received these photos from a New York resident showing a group giving out these rapid tests from iHealth, a Chinese manufacturer. Melina, can you tell us more about this? How much is the administration relying on China for these tests?
Steve, this is a question I've asked to both Health and Human Services and the White House. Specifically, I asked them how many tests they're importing from China, and considering that the administration has acknowledged that China does pose a threat, at the very least economically, how the administration is planning to take steps to protect the country on the national security front, as they're still depending on the regime to some extent for these rapid tests. And as of right now, Steve, we haven't gotten any response from Health and Human Services or from the White House. But we will be sure to follow up on this, and we'll provide more information as we find out more. Steve?
And thanks for that, Melina. And we asked the Democratic Caucus chairman about the Biden administration's strategy for dealing with China. The New York congressman expects Biden to continue laying out a vision for dealing with the China threat. Here's a clip from that exchange.
You guys have passed some legislation. Biden signed the Forced Labor Prevention Act. Do you think that more needs to be done to hold China accountable? And if so, what do you think needs to be done?
Well, I think as President Biden has made clear, China is an adversary, a geopolitical adversary, certainly economically, and, in other strategic ways across the world. President Biden spoke to that in a very clear-throated way when he came to talk to a joint session of Congress last year. I expect that he will continue to lay out a vision. I believe we've already acted in certain important ways, including making sure that we invest in our infrastructure here in America.
Chicago teachers are heading back to the classrooms, but has the damage to children already been done? Illinois Congresswoman Mary Miller joins us to discuss. The U.S. and NATO allies are unified in rejecting Russia over the future of Ukraine.
I am just so sorry that that happened to anybody. It's heartbreaking for me.
Virginia's transportation officials are apologizing for last week's backup on Interstate 95. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capitol Report. On Wednesday, Chicago reopened schools after Mayor Lori Lightfoot and the teachers union came to a tentative agreement. It did not include union demands of widespread testing or a district-wide commitment to remote learning during a surge. The union is voting today on whether to accept the agreement, and a number of Portland, Oregon schools are moving to remote learning due to the surge of the Omicron variant.
My kid is afraid to eat lunch at school.
While some parents express that remote learning is useless for their children, there is still fear among others. Illinois Congresswoman Mary Miller is on the Committee on Education and Labor. We had a chance to sit down with her to get her thoughts on how these pandemic-related measures have affected young people. Congresswoman Mary Miller, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Congresswoman, I want to ask you about these teachers' unions. We're seeing a lot of pushback from both sides of the aisle to get children back into school. And I just want to ask you, why do you think that we're seeing both Democrats and Republicans, parents, pushing back on this issue?
Well, because it's so unhealthy for the children. And, you know, you're probably like me. I'm so over this whole COVID agenda. I want it to be over, but I have to say there are some silver linings in it. And one of them is that it's exposing people and organizations for who they are, who we've known them to be, or what we have known them to be for a long time. And one of them is the teachers' unions. They've been bullies. They have not been definitely not representing the student or the parents, and a lot of times the teachers. I have friends and family members that have been career teachers. They want to be in school, and the teachers' unions don't represent any of them.
Now, Congresswoman, how damaging to a student's development do you think it is to not have in-person learning?
Oh, I just think when we look back on this and we are able to, rationally evaluate the effect this has had on our children, the emotional damage, social damage, the academic damage that's been done. We already know that children are falling behind both in English and in math. I know I've got 7 children and I've been involved in education, and kids need routine and they need structure in order to thrive. So I can't think of anything worse that could be happening. And then just what this does to the family environment, it upsets the whole family. There's people that want to home educate, and I think that that's fantastic, but there's other people that don't want to be forced into this position. And this is different than parents thinking long and hard, doing the research and evaluating curriculums and planning to home educate. This is forcing something on parents that they don't want, and even progressive parents don't want their children sitting in front of a computer screen all day.
Now, I want to ask you about the issue of critical race theory. This has been a national issue now, pushed into the spotlight mainly because of the governor race that took place in Virginia. What are your thoughts on this critical race theory? Is it something that truly exists?
Well, it definitely exists. This is the leftist agenda to divide us. It's very unhealthy ideas. They're teaching kids to hate their country, to possibly hate their skin color, to hate their peers sitting in school. And it's victim mentality instead of helping our kids to be victors. And definitely, I think I want transparency in schools. The schools should be accountable to the parents and to the taxpayers. And we should know what's being taught in the schools. I want complete transparency, and they are accountable. The schools and the school boards and the teachers should be accountable to the parents.
Congresswoman, you were just telling me before we started about a piece of education legislation that you had introduced. If you could just remind me the name of your bill and also what it aims to do.
Sure. It's called the Safety and Opportunity for Girls Act. And I proposed it. It's in direct response to President Biden on day one, wanting to open up the safe spaces and athletics for transgenders. So my bill is definitely defines in Title IX, when they talk about sex, that it is biological and genetic and not gender identity. And so, Title IX was, the purpose of it was to open up athletic opportunities for girls and women. And now what Biden and his administration, his education secretary are doing is by allowing transgenders in, they are going to basically ruin girls' athletics abilities or opportunities.
Congresswoman Mary Miller, thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
The casket of former Senator Harry Reid is lying in state at the United States Capitol. colleagues and friends gather to pay tribute to the former Senate Majority Leader.
Harry was tough as nails, a fighter to his core, but one of the most compassionate individuals you could ever imagine.
It is here where he served for more than 3 decades representing his beloved home state of Nevada, including 2 terms in the House of Representatives.
Reid was the Senate Democratic leader for 12 years, including 8 years as the Majority Leader. After a 4-year battle with pancreatic cancer, Reid died last month at the age of 82. U.S. diplomats are rejecting non-starter proposals from Russian President Vladimir Putin about security in Europe. This during the NATO-Russia Council meeting on Wednesday regarding the future of Ukraine.
Together, the United States and our NATO allies made clear we will not slam the door shut on NATO's open door policy.
The NATO-Russia Council meeting came during a week of high-stakes diplomacy. The U.S. is leading an effort to prevent what Washington believes could be a Russian invasion of Ukraine. But U.S.-Russia talks earlier this week fell into a deadlock over NATO's expansion, an issue that Russia is prioritizing. Sherman said on Wednesday that Russia has to make a stark choice between de-escalation and confrontation.
If Russia walks away, however, it will be quite apparent they were never serious about pursuing diplomacy at all. That is why collectively we are preparing for every eventuality.
Russia now has around 100,000 combat-ready troops amassed near Ukraine's eastern border. Moscow denies it is planning an attack. On Monday, the U.S. Coast Guard rescued 176 Haitians sailing toward the Florida Keys. 10 of them were sent to the hospital with symptoms of dehydration. The Haitians will be processed for removal proceedings and transferred to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Coast Guard crews rescued close to 560 Haitians just 3 months into the fiscal year, a sharp increase compared to last year. Virginia transportation officials are apologizing for last week's backup on Interstate 95.
I am just so sorry that that happened to anybody. It's heartbreaking for me.
Historic rates of snowfall and heavy traffic led to a complete standstill, trapping thousands of commuters for as long as 24 hours. Many of them were without food, water, or sufficient gas to heat their cars. Virginia's transportation officials said that their efforts to warn drivers about the coming storm may not have made enough of an impact. This may be because of the warm, pleasant weather leading up to the storm. And that's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Steve Lance, and we'll be back tomorrow with more of the latest news straight from the nation's capital. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow.